the child of Villa del Silenzio. I never truly understood why I agreed to stay in that house. The locals called it the Villa del Silenzio, though I only learned the name after I had already set foot inside. It stood at the edge of a small Tuscan village, half forgotten among olive groves that had grown wild, their twisted trunks clutching at the soil like ancient hands reaching upward from graves. The villa itself loomed, pale and lifeless, its once white plaster walls now dulled to a grayish hue. Ivy curled over its frame like veins on an old body, and the shutters hung loose, swaying faintly though there was no wind. I arrived late in the afternoon, when the sun was sinking low, turning the hills into waves of red and gold. Even then, the house resisted the light. The long shadows clung to it as if reluctant to let it breathe. Inside, the air smelled of dust and something faintly metallic, as though the scent of rust lingered within the walls themselves. My footsteps echoed too loudly against the marble floor of the entrance hall, bouncing from wall to wall until the sound dissolved into a muffled hum. The villa was silent, unnervingly so. Not the kind of silence that comes from peace, but the kind that presses down on the skin, heavy and watchful. I wandered through the rooms, one after another, tracing my fingers across walls cracked with age, breathing in the stale odor of closed spaces that hadn't been touched for years. Curtains hung stiff with dust, and beams of light cut through the fabric in sharp, narrow slices. Every time I entered a room, I felt as though I was intruding, as if the house had been left in anticipation of someone's return. I found the child's room on the upper floor. It was small compared to the others, tucked at the far end of a narrow corridor where the air grew colder with each step. The door creaked open reluctantly, revealing pale walls and a bed with a frame of blackened wood. A broken toy lay discarded on the floor, the head of a porcelain doll shattered, glassy eyes staring upward. Something in me recoiled. There was a sensation, sharp and cold, as though I had walked into the very breath of another presence. That night, as I lay in the room across from it, I couldn't shake the awareness of the child's room watching me. Even with the door closed, I felt tethered to it. The house was vast, yet every creak, every faint draft seemed to emerge from that end of the hall. I could hear the faint rustle of fabric, as though curtains stirred though the windows were latched. I kept my eyes open, staring at the ceiling, but eventually exhaustion dragged me under. I woke in the blackest hours, when even the cicadas outside had gone quiet. My chest tightened. I felt the weight of silence crushing down, so deep it became its own sound, like a hum resonating in my bones. That was when I noticed the faint patter. Bare feet against the marble corridor. Light, delicate, deliberate. They paused directly outside my door. My heart pounded against my ribs as I lay frozen, staring at the darkness. The sound moved again, soft and playful, retreating toward the child's room. The next morning, I forced myself to walk the hall. Sunlight painted the villa golden, yet the corridor where the child's room waited remained cold and dim, as though the light could not reach that far. I stood before the door listening. My hand hovered over the handle. For a long moment, I thought I heard a whisper, a faint, breathless murmur, like the sound of a child exhaling words into the fabric of silence. My skin prickled. I couldn't bring myself to go in. Days bled together, slow and heavy. The villa seemed to pulse with a rhythm of its own, alive in its stillness. At night the sounds grew clearer. The patter of feet, sometimes a dragging sound, sometimes a faint knock against the wall. Always in the same place. Always in that room. I found myself dreading the fall of evening, watching the long shadows grow like stains across the stone floors. On the fourth night, I made a mistake. Curiosity overcame fear. I left my door open, just a crack as I lay in bed. The silence returned, suffocating and immense, until the faint steps emerged once more. My breath caught. From the slit of the doorway, I saw the corridor stretch in pale moonlight, and then movement, small and slight. A child, drifting across the hall with unnatural grace, feet bare, hair falling like a curtain around a pale face. I could not see eyes, only the hollow impression of a gaze turned toward me. She stopped in the center of the hall, motionless, her head tilting ever so slightly, as if studying me. I couldn't move. My throat locked. My pulse screamed in my ears, yet I couldn't look away. After what felt like an eternity, she turned, slipping back into the dark mouth of the child's room. The air seemed to sigh with her absence, though the chill remained. From then on, I knew I wasn't simply imagining it. Each day, small signs grew harder to ignore. The doll in the child's room had shifted, fragments scattered farther than before. Dust on the floor revealed tiny footprints leading toward the bed. Once, as I passed by in daylight, the door swung inward on its own, the hinges crying out. Inside, the curtain moved though no wind stirred. The villa was consuming me. My thoughts became sluggish, dulled by the oppressive quiet. I began to avoid mirrors because in the dim glass I thought I saw movement that didn't belong to me. The smell of old flowers lingered constantly, sweet, rotting, cloying. I could taste it in my mouth when I breathed. Nights became longer, darker, as though time itself slowed inside those walls. The final night arrived without warning. I woke to the sound of laughter, soft, distant, childlike. It seeped through the villa like smoke, filling every room until I felt surrounded. I rose, feet trembling against the cold floor, and stepped into the hall. The laughter grew louder as I approached the child's room, a melody both innocent and hideous. The door was wide open. Inside, the moonlight painted everything silver. And there she was, the child sitting on the bed, hair falling over her face, her small hands resting in her lap. She did not move, but I felt her eyes pierce through me, colder than anything I had ever known. The laughter stopped instantly. Silence dropped like a blade, sharp and absolute. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. My vision blurred at the edges as I stumbled backward. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me, and the darkness thickened, swelling until it consumed the room, the hall, and me within it. When I woke, it was morning. The room was empty. The villa breathed again in its unnatural silence. But I knew something had changed. The air was heavier. My skin carried the chill of unseen hands that had touched me in the night. The villa had seen me, and it had chosen not to let me leave untouched. I departed that same day, the sun glaring against the hills, the village quiet in its eternal rhythm. Yet even now, when I close my eyes, I hear it again, the faint patter of bare feet in the silence. The child of Villa del Silenzio still follows, her gaze clinging, waiting, reminding me that some houses do not forgive intrusion. Some silences are alive, and some children are never meant to grow old. The Playmate in the Courtyard. I remember the villa most clearly by its courtyard. It was not large, not grand, but it carried a presence I could never put into words. At the heart of that small square was a stone well, its surface eaten by centuries of rain and moss. The ground was paved with uneven bricks, cracked and slick with green, and the air always seemed cooler there than anywhere else in the village. I could never decide if the place was beautiful or ruined. It was both at once, suspended in time, as if waiting for something to step out of the past and rejoin the present. The villa belonged to distant relatives who had let it slip into decay. They asked me to stay for a while, to keep an eye on things as repairs were arranged. I had thought it a simple task, almost a gift, time away from the noise of cities, from obligations. But the moment I set foot inside, I felt it. A heaviness pressed upon me, not hostile, not welcoming, only persistent, as if the walls themselves had grown used to holding secrets. From my first night there, I knew the courtyard would not leave me in peace. The windows of my room faced it directly. Even with the shutters closed, I could sense its geometry pressing against me, the square symmetry, the stone well like an eye set into the villa's chest. In the dark, I would imagine it staring upward at me, blind but aware. I would hear small sounds that belonged only outside, drips of water, the scrape of something moving against the bricks, faint rustles that suggested more than wind. The mornings were deceptively gentle. Sunlight spilled into the courtyard and made the moss glisten like emeralds. Swallows darted overhead, their wings cutting swift shadows across the stone. I would almost forget the night's discomfort. Almost. But then my eyes would drift to the well, and I would see the lip of it glistening as though perpetually damp, though the summer had been dry for weeks. I would hear, if I stood close enough, a hollow resonance from below, not quite echo, not quite water, but something in between. It was on the third day that the child appeared. I saw movement through the shutters, the kind of quick dart that registers at the edge of vision. When I looked directly, there was nothing but the stillness of the courtyard, yet the sense of being watched lingered. That evening, as I sat near the window, I heard it, the faint shuffle of small feet, the uneven rhythm of a child running across old bricks. My body tensed, frozen. Slowly, I pressed my face to the shutters, peering through the thin slit. There she was, a little girl, no older than 6 or 7, standing by the well. Her dress was pale, or perhaps simply faded by the moonlight. Her hair hung long and dark, and though her face was hidden, I knew she was staring directly at my window. I pulled back immediately, heart hammering. But the sound of her steps returned, circling the courtyard, light and erratic, like a child playing some game whose rules I could never understand. From then on, nights became a slow torture. I would lie in bed, listening to the scrape of tiny shoes, the occasional thud of a body brushing against the well. Sometimes there was laughter, faint and brittle, carrying too far for its volume. Other times there was only silence, which somehow felt worse, because I knew she was still there. The villa held its breath, and so did I, until morning finally bled the shadows away. I began to notice changes in the courtyard itself. In the daytime, objects seemed displaced, small stones arranged in patterns like circles or crosses, laid carefully across the bricks. I would sweep them aside, but the next day they would return, different each time. The well seemed to grow darker, its mouth like a wound that deepened with every glance. Once, when I passed too close, a gust of cold rose from it, cutting through the heat of the afternoon like a blade of ice. The villagers avoided speaking of the villa. When I mentioned the courtyard in passing, their expressions closed, their voices shifted. One old man muttered that children should never play near wells, that some holes never stop taking. I did not press further. His warning lingered with me, twisting into my thoughts until every night felt like a repetition of the same ritual. The child, the circling steps, the sound of something dripping endlessly into the dark below. It was the 5th night when I finally saw her face. The moon was high, silvering the courtyard until it looked almost alive. I had left the shutters slightly open, telling myself I wanted air, though in truth it was something darker, a need to prove to myself that the girl was only in my imagination. She appeared suddenly, as if conjured from the stillness, standing beside the well. This time she raised her head. Her face was pale, too pale, the color of paper bleached and worn. Her eyes were hollow, not dark, not light, but voids that swallowed the moon. Her mouth was small, pressed into something that might have been a smile but carried no warmth, only absence. She lifted her hand as though inviting me. My body stiffened, unable to respond, and I felt my chest tighten with something primal, a recognition of danger older than reason. I closed the shutters, forcing myself away from the window, heart stuttering in my throat. Yet the sound of her play continued, louder than ever. She was running now, circling faster, her feet striking the bricks with hollow echoes. I pressed my palms to my ears, but the sound burrowed in, relentless. When it stopped, the silence was unbearable, more suffocating than the noise. I did not sleep. The next morning, I found marks scratched into the stone near the well. Small lines, uneven but deliberate. I crouched to study them. They resembled tally marks, dozens of them carved crudely into the mossy bricks. My stomach turned as I counted. There were far too many. Too many for one child, too many for one lifetime. Each day after, the villa grew heavier. The air thickened, the shadows deepened. At night I felt not just one presence but many, as if the courtyard had become a gathering place. I would hear multiple sets of feet, faint giggles overlapping, the sensation of children swarming unseen across the square. The well became their center, the heart of their endless play, their voices rising like whispers from its hollow mouth. I could not endure it. On my final night, I stood at the window, trembling, as the game began again. This time they all appeared. Not just the girl, but others. Pale figures darting across the courtyard, their shapes blurred yet distinct enough to know they were children. They ran in circles, their laughter a chorus of broken bells. At the center stood the girl from the first night, her face turned upward, her empty eyes fixed on me. She raised both arms, and the others stopped at once, their bodies still, their heads snapping toward my window in perfect unison. The silence that followed was deeper than death. My body shook, but I could not move, could not look away. Then, all at once, they rushed to the well, vanishing into its mouth as though swallowed whole. The courtyard fell empty, the night air heavy with the stench of damp earth and something sour, like old blood. I left at dawn, unable to endure another moment. I closed the shutters, locked the doors, and walked away without looking back. But the memory of that courtyard follows me still. At night, when I try to sleep, I hear faint footsteps circling, as though the game continues, waiting for me to join. The well never closes. The children never stop playing. And once you have seen them, they do not let you forget.